Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to take a look at this new controller from 8BitDo. It is called the Ultimate Wireless Controller. Now I've already reviewed one of these Ultimate controllers before. They released a wired version for the Xbox a few months back. And I was a big fan of that controller, and so when I heard there was going to be a wireless version available, I picked it up immediately. Now the functionality of this controller goes well beyond just being wireless. In fact, 8BitDo has really kind of stepped things up when it comes to compatibility. For example, this controller now comes with its own docking station. What that means is you can plug a USB cord here into the back, and then when you drop the controller into the dock, it's going to start charging it. And I love this idea because I don't have to consciously think about, is my battery going to get low? Do I need to recharge it? All that is taken care of in the dock. And secondly, probably the most exciting thing for me here is that it comes with a 2.4 GHz wireless connector. So once you plug this into a compatible device, you'll be able to immediately start gaming without having to do any sort of pairing or configuration. Now picking up one of these controllers is surprisingly confusing because there are two different models that are available right now. The model that we're reviewing today is the lower priced $50 model. This one comes in three different colors, black, pink, and white. But it only has wireless connectivity via the dongle, not through Bluetooth, which means you'll be able to connect it up to a PC or an Android or Raspberry Pi, but unfortunately it's not compatible with the Nintendo Switch. Also make note here that the rechargeable battery lasts 15 hours. Now what makes this confusing is there is a second model also releasing that is $20 more, and this one is only in black and white. What sets this one apart is that it has Bluetooth connectivity, and so if you want to have a connection without a dongle, this is going to be your only choice. Additionally, this $70 model is the only one that works with the Nintendo Switch as well. But on the other hand, this one does not provide a D-input signal, which is going to limit its functionality with an Android. In addition to the connectivity differences here, it also comes with Hall sensing joysticks, which means it won't have stick drift over time. Additionally, between the two, this is the only controller that has gyroscopic motion controls, and it somehow has a larger battery with 22 hours of life. And so I imagine you might already be confused about the different types of features available between these two controllers. And so in this video, I'm hoping to clarify specifically what you can expect from the lower priced $50 model that we'll be reviewing here. And I gotta say, long story short, unless you want to play Nintendo Switch specifically with this controller, I think this one is the one to get. And so without any further delay, let's jump right into it. Okay, let's do a quick unboxing here first. Now, I pre-ordered this via Amazon and it arrived a couple days before the release date. That wasn't any sort of special thing because I'm a YouTuber, like I literally just got lucky and they sent it out early. Let's start by having a look at the dock. This has a nice plastic feel to it, very similar to the front of the controller, and it has a little bit of heft to it as well. On the bottom it has some rubber padding to keep it in place, and then if you open up this little compartment here, you have the 2.4 GHz dongle. But yeah, overall I think the dock is well made, although I do wish it was a little bit heavier to make it more sturdy. It also comes with a USB cable, which will charge the device if you'd like, and you can also play it wired. There is a quick manual here and it just kind of walks you through some of the functions, but I gotta say, the functionality of the controller itself is pretty bare bones. In terms of charging input, you can see here it's just 5 volts and 1 amp, so it's not going to be a fast charge or anything else like that. It'll probably take an hour or two to charge it from being depleted. Placing the controller in the dock gives a satisfying click sound. Let me give you a taste here. And yeah, there's nothing really super special about the connectivity here, it's just these 3 pins connecting to the back of the controller. But yeah, overall I think it's well made and nice and sturdy. And it is super satisfying to drop this in. I'd say overall between the two, they're about the same weight, maybe the dock is a little bit lighter. Now let's talk about the controls themselves. I've already talked about this in my Xbox controller video, but let's just go over the basics again. When it comes to shoulders and triggers, they are more alike to the PlayStation controllers than they are Xbox. The bumpers have a nice satisfying soft click to them, and the triggers themselves are analog and definitely formed after the PS4 or even the PS5 triggers. I think the amount of travel here on the triggers is just about right. This is exactly what I would want to find when I'm playing something like a racing game. But all the same, the travel is less than on an Xbox controller, which makes it pretty good for shooters too. The left and right bumpers are nice and snappy, which means you can just tap on them quickly and it's going to register the input. That's perfect for me. And of course, the layout of the analog sticks is more aligned to the Nintendo Switch Pro or the Xbox controller. Let's talk about these face buttons. First of all, they use the A, B, and XY pattern of an Xbox, and the buttons themselves are very similar to an Xbox controllers as well. They're a little bit more rounded than your typical 8BitDo controller buttons, and yeah, they feel very great, super professional, just as good as something like on an Xbox. The size and travel here is just about perfect. On the center, we have some rubber conductive menu buttons. We have our start and select button, and then the star button acts as a turbo button as well. Below that, we have a profile button, which you can set in the software. We'll do that later in the video. Above that, we have a home button. This works as an Xbox or even a Steam Deck button if you're using that device. Okay, let's talk about the feel of the controller itself. So it has a nice smooth plastic here on the front, and it is very well made. On the back side around the grips, we have a more bumpy texture, and this also feels very nice and grippy. And so overall, I think this is the best of both worlds. You have some grippiness on the back, but then the front actually feels nice and smooth too. I feel like I could hold this controller for hours on end. So next, let's take a look at this D-pad. This has a rubber membrane connection and feels a lot like a Super Nintendo controller. However, the controller is inset into a divot here, which makes it feel a little bit more rounded than you would on a classic controller. I actually think that's a good mixture of modern and retro right here. Taking a look at the analog sticks here, you can see they are very similar to what you would find on an Xbox controller. They have that same kind of clacky feel, and yes, they click down for L3 and R3. On the backside, you can see the 3 pins for charging on the dock. It also has a toggle here between the D input and X input modes. This will be helpful if you're going to be switching between an Android input and Windows. Also on the back, we have 2 programmable paddle buttons. We'll go over these here in a minute when we go into the software, but yeah, these feel really good too. They are super easy to access with your middle fingers, but at the same time, they are not sticking out so much that you would accidentally press them. And so yes, I think this controller is one of the best that 8BitDo has ever made. They've made a lot of refinements over the years, and it shows in this one here. And as I mentioned before, I'm no stranger to this controller. I've been using the similar one here that is wired for several months now. In fact, anytime I do any sort of PC gaming testing, this is the controller that I use. I can plug it directly into Windows and it works perfectly every time. I think what I like about it is that it is shaped a lot like an Xbox controller, but that wired connectivity makes it super simple to use as well. So rather than compare this controller against the one that looks exactly like it, let's test it against something else. We'll start with the Xbox controller. Like I mentioned before, the analog sticks are very similar to this one. Same thing with how rounded the buttons are. They might be a little bit more rounded on the Xbox, but they're very close. The shoulders have a similar feel, but the triggers themselves have a lot more travel on an Xbox controller than the 8BitDo one. Comparing it to the DualSense controller on the PS5, you can see that the buttons are a lot flatter on this one. But when it comes to the shoulder buttons and the triggers, they're just about the same. Of course, the DualSense controller has that haptic feedback, so depending on the game, it will feel a little bit differently. And of course, the analog stick and D-pad layout here are much different as well, so this isn't a great comparison. At the end of the day, I think that 8BitDo calling this their ultimate controller is not very far-fetched. They've improved upon every little component over the years to the point where I don't really see them improving it anymore from here. Admittedly, my favorite controllers are Xbox controllers, so it makes sense that I like this one so much. It's a little bit flatter and longer than an Xbox controller, like how it is on a Switch Pro controller, but other than that, man, this feels really great. Honestly, the only other third-party controller that is as good as this one is this one here, GuliKit's King Kong 2 Pro. Now, I've also reviewed this controller, and honestly, I don't think it's a good comparison between these two. To start, this one has a more soft plastic feel. It's almost rubbery compared to something like the 8BitDo. Additionally, when it comes to design, you can see this one is much more like the Xbox controller, especially when it comes to these analog triggers. Another aspect that makes this controller unique is that it has Hall sensing analog triggers. The analog sticks are also Hall sensing, but honestly, they feel a lot like any other controller. These triggers, on the other hand, feel incredible. They glide more smoothly than any other controller I've used before. This one also has a retro style D-pad, which I appreciate over something like the Xbox controllers. But there are a couple things that are a little bit odd. For example, the A, B, and XY pattern here is modeled after the Nintendo Switch and not like the Xbox. And while I've tested 2 different models of this particular controller, I have seen reports where the A button sticks for certain users. So if that does happen to you, I would definitely contact the company and see if you can get a replacement sent out. Additionally, this one has Bluetooth connectivity with just about everything, so you can use it with Nintendo Switch, Windows, Android, as well as Mac. And like with that other version of the 8BitDo controller, this one is also priced at a higher level of $70. And recently they started shipping out a white model as well as the ability to swap out those buttons as well. On top of that, the company recently announced that these controllers will be available in Target soon. However, the one thing that really sets this apart is that it doesn't have a docking station and it doesn't have that 2.4 GHz dongle. And to me, that's what attracted me to the 8BitDo one instead. And so while the Gillikit one definitely has more versatility when it comes to things you can connect it to, I'm personally more interested in what kind of use cases we can get with a docked solution like this. And so that's what I mean by saying they are not a very good comparison between the two. Okay, before we get into the gameplay testing, let's talk a little bit about the software functions that are available to you. You can grab their software either from their website or through the Microsoft Store, and to connect, all you have to do is plug in the wired connection. From there, you can choose between setting up the Windows or the Android input mode, and once you get into that window, you have all of the options available to you here. Inside the mapping tab, you have the ability to map any button input to any button output from there. So that gives you a huge range of customizability. Additionally, within the analog stick section, you have some other functions you can change. For example, you can upgrade the sensitivity so that you don't have to go all the way across to reach 100%. And you can do the same thing when it comes to dead zone. That way you can press the controller for a bit before it actually even registers as a press. That's going to be super handy if you like to fine-tune your settings. On top of that, you can invert the X and Y axes for either the analog sticks. You can also do things like swap the analog sticks for the D-pad and the left stick, or even limit the D-pad to 4-way input only. You also have a similar function within the Triggers tab. Within here, you can change the sensitivity, either to create a dead zone or to make it so you don't have to press the trigger all the way to register 100%. And you can also swap the triggers if you'd like. You can also adjust the vibration found within the grips from 0 to 5. And if you want to really get into the weeds, you could assign a macro function to any of the buttons as well. So if you wanted, you could press a single button and it would go through an entire command right here. Now, I forgot to mention it earlier, but within the mapping tab too, this is where you can map those back paddles. For me personally, I like to assign the A button to the right paddle. That means I can jump in a first-person shooter game without having to take my finger off the right analog stick. Either way, you can do whatever you'd like within the menu here. And additionally, you can create 3 different profiles depending on which game you're playing, and then you can swap them by pressing that profile button on the controller. Anyway, once you have that set up, you can sync to the device and you're good to go. So now let's actually talk about the practical use of this controller. You can see here I've connected the Wi-Fi dongle to this mini PC. I'm running Steam here within their new interface. And it works exactly as I would expect. Now when I drop it into the docking station, you can see here that the power actually goes off on the controller. And you can tell because the home button is no longer lit up. However, there's a new light that shows up at the bottom of the docking station to indicate that it's charging. And so now, anytime I want to play, all I have to do is just take the controller out of its dock and it'll immediately start pairing with the dongle. I don't even have to press the home button or anything, it'll just take a few seconds to connect. And it takes a bit to connect, as you can see from the timestamp below, but it's not terrible. Either way, yes, once I had it connected, it was absolutely perfect. This is providing an X input signal directly to that dongle, and yeah, the connectivity here is great. It's super solid and the input lag is nowhere to be found. And so I think when it comes to PC gaming, if you have something set up like this and you've got a spare USB port, this could be a really great setup. The reason why I love it is because I don't have to worry about pairing Bluetooth, but in addition to that too, I don't have to worry about charging it either. I can just drop it into the dock, and then when I'm ready to play, I'll just pull it off and start playing. But admittedly, the reason why I wanted to use this in the first place didn't have anything to do with Windows PC gaming, but rather I wanted to try it with the Steam Deck. And so here I am connecting the dongle to the back of the official Valve Steam Deck dock, and yeah, it connected immediately. Interestingly enough, you cannot use it in X input mode, you have to switch it over to that D connection instead. But after I had it connected, absolutely no problems whatsoever. It's super awesome to not have to go into the Bluetooth menu and worry about pairing or anything else like that. In fact, this connected just as easily as it does on Windows, and everything was already mapped properly. So my emulators worked right out of the box, and these Steam games worked well too. And yeah, the functionality here works exactly like it did on Windows 2. If I drop it into the dock, it's going to turn the controller off and then start charging. And then if I pull the controller off, it'll automatically start pairing. And yeah, it does take a couple seconds here, but after that, man, you're connected and ready to go. And so honestly, among all the different use cases I'm going to show you here today, this is the one that I was most excited about, and I think it's the best fit too. I love the idea of having a Steam Deck dock connected to your TV and then turning it into a console when you want to have it, and having a consoleized controller like this too really helps as well. Now this controller also works with Android as well, however you're going to have to keep it in some sort of docked situation to be able to plug in the USB controller. Here I am using the Odin Pro with the Valve Steam Dock, and as you can see it's upside down because the plugin is on the bottom of the device, but either way it works perfectly fine. So again, this is in that D input setting, and yeah, it connected just right. Not only that, my RetroArch mark profile picked up on the controller and I didn't have to do any sort of mapping whatsoever. And same thing with a couple of the other standalone emulators as well. For example, the PSP emulator worked just fine without having to do any sort of remapping. However, I did find that the AB and XY profile was swapped around like the Nintendo style. So what you have to do for the Odin in particular is you have to go into the ABXY mode and then switch it back from Xbox mode to the Odin mode. That'll make it so the A button works as intended. Now for some of the emulators you will have to manually remap them. Thankfully with Aetherus X2 and DuckStation they just have an automatic mapping option and that works perfectly. But for something like Dolphin when playing GameCube you will have to remap every time. It's kind of a pain in the butt, but that's just how it goes with that emulator. Either way, yes, in a nutshell, this will work perfectly fine when docked. In fact, I still own the Odin Super Dock and honestly, I never use it. And I think something like using the Valve Steam Deck dock like this instead just makes a lot more sense. It's kind of awkward that you gotta place the device upside down, but you can also just turn off the screen and you won't notice it anyway. Alright, this has gone on way longer than I thought a controller video would go, and so let's go ahead and start moving into what I like and what I don't like about this new controller. Number one, I think the controller feels great. All of the buttons are easily accessible, and it is very clear that this is the result of refinement over the years. With the exception to the Gillica controller, I think this one is the best third-party controller available right now. And one of the things that really makes this controller stand out is that ultimate software. You can do so much customization within here that no other controller stands close to this. I'm also a huge fan of this docking station. It just seems super convenient and I wish more controllers would have this option as well. I love the fact that it turns off the controller when you add it and then it starts pairing immediately once you take it off. And of course, the main reason why I bought this in the first place is because I love having a 2.4 GHz connector. Call me crazy, but I'm one of those people that prefer to use a dongle like this over Bluetooth. I just really like the idea of being able to connect to something without having to go into a Bluetooth menu, and sometimes Bluetooth connectivity can be unreliable as well. Having a dongle like this just takes everything else out of the equation. And finally, I think this is a perfect device for a docked Steam Deck. In fact, this is one of my favorite kinds of Steam Deck accessories. It makes a device that works so well work even better. I love the idea of playing the Steam Deck in portable mode and then dropping it into its own dock, then grabbing the controller and immediately start playing on your TV as well. Honestly, the sheer simplicity and convenience of that kind of connectivity setup means that I'm probably going to play this even more than I usually would. Now, of course, this thing is not perfect, so let's talk about some of the things I don't really like about the 8BitDo Ultimate Controller. Number one, it is a little bit disappointing that it doesn't have Switch support. The way I see it, if the $70 controller can provide Switch support via USB dongle, then why can't this one as well? It's also a little bit disappointing that this one doesn't have gyro connectivity either, because that would be super helpful when emulating Switch or Wii U games. And finally, the main thing about the Ultimate controllers that I find the most confusing is which one to actually buy. When it comes down to it, neither of these are perfect. For example, the Bluetooth one does have the ability to connect to Switch, but it does not have the ability to switch between X input and D input. What that means is the Bluetooth one doesn't have D input at all. It's going to limit the ability to connect to Android. And because the Steam Deck only detected the D input signal of my dongle, that means you won't be able to use a dongle with the Bluetooth version at all for the Steam Deck. Instead, you're going to be limited to connecting to the Steam Deck via Bluetooth only. And personally, since I think having the dongle connected to the Steam Deck is one of the best features available, I think the cheaper one is the better one to get in that regard. Now, if you want to have those additional features like Hall sensing joysticks or a larger battery or gyroscopic controls, you only can have the Bluetooth one. And so it's just kind of unfortunate that the 2.4 GHz version has some features that aren't available in the Bluetooth one. I'd love to be able to say, yes, spend the extra $20 and you can get all the features from the other one, but more. But the honest truth is, right now, you have to pick and choose depending on what your gameplay style is. And considering the breadth of features between the Bluetooth and 2.4 GHz one, I'm going to go with the 2.4 GHz one every time. For me, in my personal use case, I would rather have something that I can use to connect a dongle into the Steam Deck than to have another controller that can work on the Switch. But of course, if you're looking for a controller that also happens to be compatible with the Switch, then this might be an easier choice for you. At the end of the day, I think the 8BitDo Ultimate Controller is really great. And based on what it can do in terms of connecting to Windows or Steam Deck or Android via a dongle, this is exactly what I was hoping for. And so for me, yes, it's absolutely worth $50. The confusing part here is the fact that there's a $70 version that has some features but not others. And honestly, I'm so curious about how the Bluetooth one works that I have a couple of those coming in the mail as well. So be on the lookout for another video here coming soon where I'll also test the Bluetooth one and see if that one's actually going to be worth it extra $20. As it stands right now, not looking at any other controllers in the world, I'm super happy with the 2.4 GHz one here, and I think it's well worth my $50. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think that one of these is better than the other, and why? It's kind of crazy that we have to make a decision like this in the first place, but here we are. As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.